The library always felt like a sanctuary to Clara. Long after most of the town had gone to sleep, she found herself lingering among the shelves, savoring the silence. The building was old, built in the 1950s, with wooden beams that creaked in the night and fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. Most people would find it eerie. Clara found it comforting. Her evenings followed the same rhythm. A slow shuffle through the aisles to gather abandoned books, the steady stamp of the return desk, the smell of worn paper and dust. It was a routine she had perfected over years, one that dulled the sharper edges of her loneliness. Tonight was no different, or so she thought. She slid a stack of returned novels onto the desk, absently humming to herself as she cracked open the first. It was a dog-eared crime mystery, The Silent Witness, its cover frayed at the edges. When she flipped it open, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Clara frowned, bending down to pick it up. Notes, scribbles, and forgotten shopping lists weren't unusual finds in library books. But this was different. The paper was old, yellowed slightly at the edges. Neat handwriting filled the page, sharp strokes pressed firmly into the paper as if the writer had been driven by something more than casual thought. At first glance, Clara expected to see a passage copied from the novel, maybe a quote someone wanted to remember. But the first line made her stomach tighten. "I never meant to kill him." But once it was done, there was no turning back. Clara sat frozen, eyes sweeping across the page. The letter wasn't a shopping list, nor a copied passage. It was a confession. The writer described, in chilling detail, a night that had taken place 2 decades earlier. A man lured to the edge of town. A heated argument that turned violent. The fatal blow. And then, almost clinically, the disposal of the body. Dragged to the river, left beneath the stone bridge, weighed down with rocks so the current would keep the secret. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the words. This wasn't the work of a novelist's imagination. There was too much precision, too much truth in the way it was written. Each sentence carried the weight of someone reliving a moment they couldn't erase. Then her eyes landed on a line that made her heart stop. "He begged me not to do it. He called me by name the way he always did when he was afraid. He said, 'Please don't. Think of Clara.'" Her breath caught in her throat. Clara. Her name. The library seemed to shrink around her, walls pressing in as she read the line again and again. Couldn't be. Couldn't. Yet, her father's face flashed in her mind. The warm smile, the late nights when he would tuck her in, and the bitter ache of the morning he never came home again. 20 years had passed since his disappearance. The police had searched, neighbors had whispered, and eventually, the case had gone cold. She had learned to live with the unanswered questions, or at least she thought she had. But this letter, this confession, it wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was her father's ghost reaching out through a stranger's hand. Clara sat at the return desk long after the words had blurred on the page. Her hands curled tightly around the letter as though it might vanish if she let go. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now, pressing in on her ears, amplifying the hollow quiet of the library. Every creak of the old wooden beams made her glance over her shoulder, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows and claim what she held. Finally, she slid the confession back into its envelope and tucked it into her bag, as though hiding it might lessen the weight of what she had read. But it didn't. All night, the words echoed in her mind. Think of Clara. At home, she spread the letter across her kitchen table. She tried to reason with herself it could be fiction, some aspiring writer practicing in the margins of a book. But fiction didn't carry the sting of a name that belonged to her, a name that linked back to her father's disappearance. The memories she had worked so hard to bury began clawing their way to the surface. The frantic phone calls when he hadn't come home. The endless search parties scouring the woods and riverbanks. The way the neighbors had avoided her mother's eyes, as though pity was something dangerous to catch. She had been 12 years old when the police called it a cold case. 12 when they told her it was time to move forward. But Clara had never truly moved. She had simply built her life on top of the silence, the way moss grows over stone. Now, with this single letter, the silence cracked. She carried it to the police station the next morning, her palms damp as she waited at the reception desk. The officer on duty, a man younger than the mystery itself, read the note with a mixture of amusement and detachment. "Ma'am," he said, sliding it back across the counter. "We get things like this from time to time. Pranksters, people with too much imagination. If we reopened every old file based on anonymous letters, we'd never get anything done." Clara's jaw tightened. "But the details, the location, the way he—" "Coincidence?" he interrupted gently, as if explaining the world to a child. "Besides, you said yourself this was found in a library book. Could have been sitting in there for years. Maybe someone just wanted attention." She stared at him, disbelief curdling into something sharper. "So that's it? You won't even check?" The officer gave her a polite smile. "If you find more like this, maybe then. But for now, I wouldn't lose sleep over it." Clara left the station with the letter clutched to her chest. Don't lose sleep over it. How could she not? That night, she spread the note across her table again, studying every curve of the handwriting, every pressed indentation. Something about it felt deliberate, like the writer wanted her to find it. But why? Why now, after 20 years of silence? Her gaze drifted to the shelf above her kitchen sink, lined with old photo albums. She pulled one down, flipping through pictures of her father. Him laughing in the yard, holding her hand at the fair, leaning against the old stone bridge near the river. The bridge. Her throat tightened. The letter had mentioned that place specifically. It wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. Somewhere in the quiet town she thought she knew, someone was carrying a secret. And Clara, for reasons she couldn't yet understand, had been chosen to uncover it. The following week, Clara tried to return to her routine. She told herself to file the confession away in her mind as a cruel prank, or at worst, a relic of someone else's tragedy that had nothing to do with her. The library demanded order, and order was what she had always clung to. But every time she slid a book onto a shelf, she found her hands hesitating, her eyes scanning for the unexpected. And then it happened again. It was late on a Tuesday evening when she opened another return, an old poetry collection, and a slip of paper fluttered out. Clara froze, her pulse quickening. The same neat handwriting stretched across the page, sharp and deliberate. She didn't even need to read the words to know. It was them. "I thought the river would carry him away, but I was wrong. I see him still, even now, in every ripple and shadow. His eyes will not leave me." Clara's breath shuddered as she lowered herself into her chair. The words felt less like a confession and more like a haunting, the voice of someone unable to shake the weight of their crime. And buried in that voice was something else. Guilt, yes, but also a strange intimacy. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her bag beside the first. But her thoughts refused to rest. This wasn't random. This was targeted. The next night, another book. This time, tucked inside a battered children's novel. "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." 3 words scrawled over and over until the ink pressed through the page. Clara traced them with her fingertip, her skin prickling. The repetition wasn't for show. It was desperation. Whoever wrote these letters was unraveling. By the 4th discovery, a note hidden inside a travel guide about rivers, Clara's fear began to warp into suspicion. These weren't forgotten scraps left by a careless hand years ago. They were being placed there now deliberately, which meant the writer was still out there and watching. She started keeping a notebook of her own, documenting each letter, the time of day she found it, the titles of the books. A pattern emerged. Every book had been returned within the past week, which meant the letters weren't just relics, they were recent. The realization made her stomach tighten. Whoever was leaving them was still using the library, which meant she had likely spoken to them, maybe even smiled at them across the desk. Her mind began to scan the regulars. Mr. Howard, the retired schoolteacher, always borrowing history books. Sister Agnes, the town's priest, who often slipped in to borrow novels she pretended were for the orphanage. Elliot Crane, her father's old friend, who returned late at night with stacks of detective thrillers. Any of them could have done it. Each face carried the weight of possibility now, every smile tinged with menace. One evening, Clara lingered longer than usual at the return desk, pretending to organize while she watched the patrons. When Elliot approached, returning a thick novel, she felt her breath catch. He placed the book down gently, nodding at her the way he always had, like a man weighed down by some private sorrow. Her eyes followed the book as she slid it onto the cart. She had to know. Later, when the library was empty, Clara opened it. And there it was. I never stopped searching for her eyes in the crowd. They remind me of him. They remind me of what I did. Her knees weakened. Her eyes. That couldn't be coincidence. Clara pressed the note to her chest, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might echo through the empty aisles. She stared at the shadowy corners of the library, half convinced someone was still there, watching. For the first time in years, she felt afraid to lock the doors. But she knew one thing with certainty. The trail wasn't over. And whoever was leaving the notes was leading her somewhere. Somewhere she wasn't sure she wanted to go. Clara's notebook filled quickly with her scrawled observations. Times, dates, titles, faces. She studied the entries like a detective, but no matter how she arranged the details, one name kept circling back to the center. Elliot Crane, her father's old friend. He had been there the night they declared the search over. She remembered his hand on her shoulder, his quiet voice telling her that some answers never come. For years she had trusted that comfort. But now, with every note, her trust eroded. Elliot still came to the library at odd hours, long after most patrons had gone home. His returns always seemed to coincide with the letters. Clara couldn't ignore it anymore. The handwriting was firm, masculine, the strokes deliberate. The kind of script she imagined a man of Elliot's generation might have carried from school into adulthood. The possibility lodged in her chest like a shard of glass. If Elliot had been the one, if he had been involved in her father's disappearance, then every word of sympathy he'd ever offered her mother, every gentle smile he'd given Clara herself, was a mask. She needed to know. One Wednesday evening, she followed him. Elliot left the library with a small stack of books tucked under his arm, walking slowly through the quiet streets. Clara trailed him from a distance, heart thundering, her shoes scuffing softly against the pavement. He lived in a modest house near the edge of town, the same one he had shared with his wife before she passed. The porch light flickered as he unlocked the door. Clara waited until he disappeared inside, then stood there under the dim street lamp, her breath misting in the cool night air. For a moment, she almost turned back. Almost. But then she thought of the notes, of her father's voice echoing in the confession. Think of Clara. Her knuckles rapped against the door before she could change her mind. Elliot opened it slowly, surprise flickering across his face when he saw her. "Clara," he said warmly, though his eyes darted to the dark street behind her. "What brings you here at this hour?" She hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. He stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. The house smelled faintly of tobacco and old books, much like the library. His living room was neat, almost too neat, as though staged for a visitor who never came. Clara remained standing. "Have you ever written anything down in the books you return?" she asked, watching his face closely. His brow furrowed. "In the books? No. Why would I? Because I've been finding notes, letters, and they're not." She broke off, her throat tightening. "They're not harmless." For a moment, Elliot just looked at her. Then he shook his head slowly, sadness softening his features. "Clara, I don't know what you've found, but it isn't me. I would never." "Then why do the letters keep turning up in the books you return?" she cut in, her voice sharper than she intended. He blinked, startled. Then something flickered in his eyes. A shadow, a quick flash of pain or guilt. He turned away, his hand running along the back of a chair. "Some wounds never close," he murmured, almost to himself. "They leak into everything you touch." The words chilled her. Was that an admission? A warning? "Elliot," Clara pressed, her pulse racing. "Tell me the truth. Were you there the night my father disappeared?" The silence that followed stretched taut, the clock on the mantel ticking far too loudly. Finally, Elliot faced her again. His expression was unreadable, his jaw tight. "Clara," he said gently, "some things are better left where they lie. Digging them up will only break you." Her heart sank. The answer was neither yes nor no, but it carried the weight of both. She left the house shaken, her thoughts tangled in doubt. Maybe he was guilty. Maybe he was protecting someone else. Maybe he was simply an old man burdened with grief he couldn't name. But the certainty she had sought eluded her. Back home, Clara unfolded the latest note again, running her eyes over the words. They remind me of her eyes. They remind me of him. They remind me of what I did. Whoever had written it wasn't done. And neither, she realized, was she. The next note appeared 3 days later. Clara almost didn't notice it at first. Tucked between the last pages of a gardening manual, as if hidden with care. Her hands shook as she pulled it free, bracing herself for more fragments of guilt and shadow. But this one was different. The handwriting, though still neat, carried a slight tremor, as though written by someone whose strength was fading. And the words themselves struck her harder than all the others combined. "Forgive me, Clara. I never meant for you to find these. But you have always been searching, and I can no longer bear the silence. It was me. It was always me." Clara blinked, her mouth going dry. She lowered herself into the nearest chair, reading on with a kind of numb disbelief. "Your father was not the man you remember. He was cruel in ways you were too young to see. That night, I begged him to stop, begged him to leave us in peace. But his rage had no end. I struck him, once, and then again. By the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. I dragged him to the river. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Her vision blurred. The words swam on the page, refusing to settle. "Me." The signature at the bottom wasn't a name but a single word. "Mom." Clara's breath came in shallow bursts. Her mother, the one who had kept vigil at the window for months after her father vanished. The one who had pressed Clara's face into her lap when the neighbors whispered. The one who had carried the grief like a stone for 20 long years. It wasn't grief at all. It was guilt. Clara dropped the note onto the desk, pressing her hands over her face. A sob clawed its way out of her chest, ragged and unwilling. The room tilted around her. How long had her mother known she would find them? Had she been planting the notes herself, or had someone else? Elliot, perhaps, been her accomplice in unburdening the truth? The thought tangled in Clara's mind, but the letter was clear. The final confession came from her mother's hand. Her phone buzzed, startling her. The caller ID read home. She answered with a trembling hand. "Mom!" There was a pause, then a voice, thin and breathless. "Clara, I don't have much time left. You should know before it's too late." The words cracked like glass in her ear. "It was you," Clara whispered. Silence. Then a fragile sob. "I did it for you. Everything I did for you." Clara's throat closed. She wanted to scream, to demand why her mother hadn't trusted her with the truth, why she had let her grow up drowning in mystery. But the sound that came out was softer, broken. "You lied to me. I protected you," her mother said weakly. "He would have destroyed us both." The line went quiet. Clara sat there, clutching the phone, her heart pounding in her ears. It wasn't Elliot. It wasn't a stranger. It was her own blood. The trail of notes hadn't been a game. It had been a preparation, a mother's final act of confession, a twisted inheritance. And Clara realized, with a cold weight settling in her chest, that the truth was worse than the silence had ever been. Her mother passed away 2 weeks later. The illness had been hidden for months, years, perhaps. By the time Clara knew the truth, there was nothing left to fight. She sat by the bedside in those final days, watching her mother's chest rise and fall with shallow effort, the once firm hands now fragile and weightless. Neither of them spoke of the river, or the notes, or the night 20 years ago that had cleaved their lives in two. The silence was their truce. At the funeral, Clara stood alone at the edge of the graveyard while the town murmured condolences. She accepted their words with a nod, her face unreadable. To them, her mother was a pillar of quiet dignity, a woman who had endured tragedy with grace. None of them knew the truth. None of them ever would. Back at the house, Clara packed her mother's belongings slowly, carefully, as though the objects might reveal more confessions if she lingered over them. The notes she had found in the library were gathered into a small box, tied with twine, hidden deep in her dresser. She couldn't bring herself to destroy them, but neither could she bear to look at them again. They were her inheritance, unwanted, unbearable, but hers alone. When she returned to the library, everything felt different. The aisles seemed darker, the silence heavier. She went through the motions, checking in books, stamping dates, smiling faintly at the familiar faces. But the sense of sanctuary was gone. Every book seemed like a threat now, every returned volume a vessel for some ghost that refused to rest. One evening, as she shelved a stack of returns, a slim volume slipped from her hands. It landed with a soft thud, and as she bent to retrieve it, something fluttered loose from its pages. Clara froze. It was another note, the same neat handwriting, though the strokes were bolder, steadier than her mother's final trembling hand. You don't know everything, Clara. Some secrets are heavier than one person can carry. Her breath caught. The paper trembled in her fingers. This wasn't her mother, which meant someone else still knew. Someone else had been watching all along. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, steady and merciless, as she stood in the empty library holding the new letter. The sanctuary was gone, the silence broken forever. And for the first time, Clara realized her father's ghost was not the only one haunting her.